I always
survival
like
relied
thinking
not
about
just on
where we came
strength, but on
from.
ingenuity,
Not
a
just my
defining step
family
that
or the
separated
town where I
humans from
lived,
earlier
but
apes like
something much bigger.
Organopithecus. The
I
once
mean,
thick
where did
forests give
humans
way to
even
open
begin?
grasslands,
We
forcing
see
some
ourselves in the
primates to
mirror every
experiment with
morning,
new survival
but behind that
strategies.
reflection is a story that goes back millions of
The
years.
heat of an African
It's
afternoon
almost
bears
like a
down as
mystery
Homo
book,
habilis
and
crouches
every
over a
fossil is
carcass.
a clue.
With deliberate
One of
precision,
those clues hides in the
This
name
species marked the
Auranopithecus.
first true step away
That
from
name sounds
ape-like
huge,
ancestors,
like a puzzle piece
experimenting with
dropped out of
upright
an ancient
posture in a
jungle.
world.
this was a golden
The first
age,
time
with
I heard
dozens
it,
of species
I thought it
thriving
sounded
across
like a
Africa and
dinosaur.
Eurasia. As
But
climates
no, it
shifted,
wasn't a
not all
dinosaur.
would survive.
It was an ape, a very old one, that lived long before humans like us walked around. Scientists believe this creature might be part of our story, maybe even a key to unlocking where humans first started separating from the world of apes. Imagine the Earth about 9 million years ago. The world wasn't shaped the way it is now. Europe was not the same as the Europe you see on a map today. Africa had thick forests and rolling grasslands. Rivers cut through the land, bringing life to everything around them. And somewhere in Greece, in those ancient forests and rocky hills, Auranopithecus lived. I like to imagine what it was like. The air must have been heavy with heat in summer, with insects buzzing around and birds flying above. The land was changing, too, forests shrinking in some places, open fields growing wider. This change in land meant change in food. Apes had to adapt to survive, and Auranopithecus was one of them trying to figure it out. From fossils, scientists know that Auranopithecus was a big ape. Not small like a monkey, not exactly like the chimpanzees we see today, but something in between. Strong jaws, big teeth, and a body built for climbing and moving around rough ground. I try to picture him grabbing wild fruits with his hands, chewing tough plants, maybe even cracking nuts with those powerful jaws. His world wasn't safe or easy. He had to be alert all the time. Now, when people hear the word ape, they sometimes think of a simple animal. But that's not fair. Apes are smart, and Auranopithecus was part of that story of growing intelligence. The way he looked for food, the way he used his body to move, even how he might have lived in groups, all of it mattered. These were the early steps toward what would later become us. Some scientists argue about Auranopithecus. They don't all agree where he fits in our family tree. Was he a cousin that lived close to the line that led to humans? Or was he more like an uncle, related but not directly our ancestor? These questions are debated in labs, in books, in dusty fossil halls. But one thing is clear, Auranopithecus showed traits that feel strangely familiar when we compare them to ourselves. For example, his teeth. Fossils show large molars, strong and flat, good for grinding. That means he was eating a tough diet, hard fruits, seeds, maybe fibrous plants. His jaw muscles had to be powerful. That kind of adaptation isn't random. It shows how early apes were already dealing with changing environments. When food got harder to find, they had to get creative with what they could eat. Doesn't that sound a little human? Adapting, changing, finding a way to survive no matter what. Sometimes I close my eyes and imagine a small group of Auranopithecus moving through a patch of forest. A mother carrying her baby, a young male climbing up a tree, an older one sitting and chewing slowly. They might not have spoken like we do, but maybe they had calls, sounds, or even looks that told each other things. A warning about danger, a call to gather, a sound of comfort. That's communication in its earliest form. And from there, I think about how millions of years later, we'd be telling stories, building languages, and writing books. It feels like the first spark that would one day light up into the fire of human speech. The funny thing about Auranopithecus is where he was found. His fossils were discovered in Greece. That surprises a lot of people. Most think of human evolution as an African story. And it is. Africa is the main stage where so much of it happened. But creatures like Auranopithecus remind us that Europe and Asia were also part of the drama. These lands weren't empty. They were filled with forests, animals, and apes trying to survive. So when we trace human roots, we can't just stick to one place. The story stretches wider. What makes Auranopithecus exciting is the possibility that he might have been close to the last common ancestor of humans and African apes. That ancestor is the mysterious figure we're all searching for, the one who connects the line of chimpanzees, gorillas, and us. If Auranopithecus is near that spot, then studying him is like peeking at a family album and seeing a very old photo of a relative who looks a little like us, but not quite. But the truth is, fossils are rare. We don't have complete skeletons. We have pieces: skulls, teeth, fragments of jaws. It's like trying to finish a giant jigsaw puzzle with most of the pieces missing. So scientists argue, make guesses, and test theories. Some say Auranopithecus is part of the great ape line, not directly ours. Others hint that he could be closer than we think. The mystery is what makes it exciting. I like that idea, the mystery. Because if we already had all the answers, the story wouldn't feel alive. What makes Auranopithecus fascinating isn't just who he was, but what he represents. He stands at the edge of a turning point, when apes were evolving in different directions. Some would lead to gorillas, some to chimps, and maybe, just maybe, one of those branches would stretch toward us. Think about it. 9 million years ago, there was no such thing as humans. No cities, no schools, no phones, no books. Just forests and rivers, rocks, and storms. And in that world, an ape like Auranopithecus lived, breathed, and survived. Without him and others like him, the story of humans might have never happened. He didn't know it, of course. He was just living his life, searching for food, protecting his group, moving through the land. But from those simple acts, the seeds of humanity were planted. The land around him was changing, too. Climate shifts were slowly drying some forests, making open lands more common. This forced apes to experiment, to explore, to adapt. Some would stay in trees, others would begin testing life closer to the ground. That movement, that curiosity, was like a small step toward walking, which would one day become one of the biggest human traits: bipedalism. Walking upright. Auranopithecus wasn't walking on two legs like us, but the stage was being set. When I think of Auranopithecus, I don't just see an ape in the past. I see the beginning of a bridge. A bridge from wild forests to human streets, from simple sounds to complex languages, from cracked nuts to cooked meals. He didn't know it, but he was part of that bridge. That's why his story matters. Because our story doesn't start with us. It starts long before, with apes like him, hidden in the shadows of time, carrying pieces of what would one day become human. When I first heard about fossils, I thought they were just rocks shaped like bones. But the more I learned, the more magical they seemed. Fossils are whispers from the past. They don't speak in words, but if you listen carefully, really carefully, they tell stories about worlds that don't exist anymore. And that's how we even know about creatures like Auranopithecus. It all started when scientists digging in Greece uncovered pieces of bones and teeth. At first glance, they were just fragments, nothing special. But scientists are like detectives, they look at things in ways most people wouldn't. To them, every tooth is a clue, every jawbone a puzzle piece. The fossils didn't come with labels. There was no tag that said, "This belongs to Auranopithecus, 9 million years old." No. The evidence had to be studied, compared, tested. When they looked closely, they realized the fossils didn't match anything living today. The teeth were too big, the jaws too strong, the shape too different from chimps or gorillas. That's when they gave it a name, Auranopithecus macedonensis. The name sounds complicated, but it basically means ape of the heavens from Macedonia, because that's where it was found. I imagine the moment those scientists held the fossil in their hands. Dust on their gloves, sunlight falling on the stone, the quiet realization that they were looking at something millions of years old. A creature that had walked, eaten, and lived in a time when humans didn't even exist. That must have felt like holding time itself. Fossils like these don't give us everything, though. That's the frustrating part. Imagine trying to build a picture of someone's face when all you have is a single tooth. Hard, right? But that's what scientists do. They compare. They look at other apes, living and extinct, and try to figure out where the fossil fits. Sometimes it's like drawing with only half the lines, guessing what the missing parts might look like. Auranopithecus was first described in the 1970s. Since then, more fossils have been found, but not enough to complete the picture. We know he had a big face, strong jaws, and large molars. His teeth tell us he probably ate tough, dry food. That gives us a picture of his environment, too. Maybe the forests around him were shrinking, replaced by open grasslands where fruit wasn't always easy to find. That would explain why his teeth had to be so powerful he had to chew harder stuff. What amazes me most is how fossils connect us to landscapes we'll never see. 9 million years ago, Greece wasn't Greece as we know it. The Mediterranean looked different, the climate was shifting. Sometimes wetter, sometimes drier. Animals roamed that we don't see today: giant mammals, strange predators, early forms of creatures we now know. And in the middle of all that, apes like Auranopithecus tried to survive. Scientists also study the soil and rocks around fossils. That's how they know how old they are. Layers of earth pile up over millions of years, like pages in a book. The deeper you go, the older the story. Radioactive elements in rocks even act like tiny clocks, ticking away silently. By measuring them, scientists can tell how many millions of years have passed. That's how they figured out Auranopithecus lived around 9 million years ago. Just saying that number makes my mind spin. 9 million. It's hard to imagine. Here's the wild part: when they compared Auranopithecus to other apes, they noticed similarities to African great apes. That raised the question: could this European ape be connected to the ancestors of humans? Or was he more like a cousin who branched off in another direction? That's where the debates begin. Some scientists believe Auranopithecus is very close to the last common ancestor of humans, chimps, and gorillas. Others think he was part of a European branch that eventually disappeared. I like thinking about both sides. On one hand, if Auranopithecus is close to our ancestor, then his fossils are like looking at the great-great-great-grandparent of humanity. On the other hand, even if he's not directly in our line, he still shows how apes were experimenting with different ways of living. Each branch tells us something important about survival, about evolution, about the paths taken and the paths lost. Imagine all the branches of a tree. Some stretch high and grow leaves, others stop short. But even the short ones are part of the tree. Auranopithecus might be one of those shorter branches, but still connected, still part of the story that led to us. When I look at pictures of his fossils, I try to imagine the living ape. Not just bones in the ground, but fur, movement, breath. A creature leaping from branch to branch, chewing slowly on hard fruits, watching the world around him with sharp eyes. Did he feel fear when predators lurked nearby? Did he comfort his young with gentle touches? Did he fight for food or space with other apes? These moments are lost in time, but fossils let us guess. Sometimes, people think fossils are boring, just stones in a museum. But to me, they're treasures. Without them, we'd have no idea who Auranopithecus was. We'd be blind to the story of our own beginnings. Fossils are not just bones. They're the closest thing to a time machine we'll ever get. Another thing I think about is how rare fossils are. For an animal to become a fossil, so many things have to go just right. The body has to be buried quickly, protected from weather and scavengers. Minerals have to seep in, replacing the bones over millions of years. Most creatures that ever lived vanished without leaving a trace. That means Auranopithecus is lucky. Or maybe we're the lucky ones to have even a small piece of him preserved. And here's something even more amazing, new discoveries are still happening. Every year, scientists find more fossils in different parts of the world. Each discovery has the chance to change the story. Maybe tomorrow, someone will dig up a skull that shows us exactly where Auranopithecus fits. Maybe we'll discover he's even closer to humans than we thought. Or maybe we'll find out he was just one of many experiments in nature's long journey of evolution. For now, we live with the mystery. Fossils tell us part of the story, but never all of it. And maybe that's a good thing. Because mystery makes us curious. Curiosity makes us search. And searching brings us closer to understanding who we are. When I think about Auranopithecus, I picture him not just as an ape in the past, but as a messenger. A messenger who carried, without knowing it, a piece of the future. His bones lay hidden for millions of years, waiting for us to find them. And when we did, they reminded us that we are not separate from nature, we are part of it, shaped by it, born from it. Fossils speak without words. They tell us that long before humans wrote history, the earth was already writing it in stone, in bone, in silent records buried under soil and rock. And every time we dig one up, we turn another page in the greatest story ever told, the story of life. The thing I find most exciting about the past isn't just the creatures themselves, it's the world they lived in. Because the earth has never stayed the same. The land, the weather, the animals, they're always changing. And when you zoom back millions of years to the time of Auranopithecus, you realize just how different everything looked. 9 million years ago, the Earth was in the middle of a slow but powerful shift. Climate change wasn't something caused by humans, yet it was nature itself reshaping the planet. Forests that had once stretched endlessly across Europe and Asia were beginning to thin out. Grasslands spread wider, trees became less dense, and the animals that lived there had to figure out how to adapt. I imagine Auranopithecus waking up in the morning, the sun already hot above the hills of ancient Greece. Around him, the world was alive with sound, the calls of birds, the rustling of leaves, the distant footsteps of large animals. This was not a quiet world. Herds of antelope-like creatures grazed in the open. Strange ancient elephants, smaller than the ones we see today, wandered through valleys. Predators stalked the grass. Life was both full and dangerous. For an ape like Auranopithecus, the environment was everything. Food, water, shelter all depended on the landscape around him. With forests shrinking, fruits became harder to find. That's why his teeth grew strong, built for chewing tougher plants. It wasn't just random, it was survival carved into his very bones. Sometimes I wonder how much he understood about the changes happening around him. Did he notice the forests becoming thinner? Did he sense that food was harder to get than before? Maybe he didn't think about it the way we do, but he must have felt it in his stomach, in the long hours spent searching for meals. Hunger is a powerful teacher. It pushes creatures to adapt or disappear. And that's what evolution is about, adapting or disappearing. Auranopithecus represents one of those moments in history when apes were forced to adapt. Some succeeded. Some didn't. But every step, every experiment, shaped the path that would one day lead to humans. The Earth's changes weren't only about plants. The climate also changed the way animals moved. As open spaces grew, some creatures became better runners. Predators had to chase faster. Prey had to dodge smarter. It was a race for survival, and apes like Auranopithecus were part of it. Maybe they weren't running across the plains like antelopes, but they had to move between trees, climb quickly, and keep alert. Living in a shifting world meant never standing still for too long. Sometimes I picture him sitting on a rock at the edge of a clearing, chewing slowly on a piece of food, his eyes scanning the land. Did he ever feel curious, the way we do? Did he look at the horizon and wonder what was beyond? Or was he just focused on the moment, the next bite, the next sound of danger, the next climb to safety? We'll never know, but I like to think curiosity has always been there, even in tiny sparks. Because curiosity is what helped creatures like him survive. Imagine discovering a new patch of food, a new path through the trees, a new way to avoid predators. Every little choice mattered. And those who made the better choices passed their traits down. That's how evolution works, not in sudden jumps, but in small, steady steps. What's fascinating is that our Australopithecus wasn't alone. Around the same time, other apes lived in different parts of the world. In Africa, Asia, and Europe, there were many kinds of apes, each adapting in their own way. Some climbed high trees, some stayed closer to the ground, some ate soft fruits, others chewed tough plants. It was like nature was running experiments, testing out different designs. Most of those apes eventually disappeared. But some, just some, gave rise to new forms that carried the story forward. That makes me think about luck. Because survival wasn't just about strength or speed, it was also about luck. One drought, one bad season, one unlucky predator attack, and a whole group could vanish. But if they found food, if they avoided danger, if they adapted just enough, they could last another generation. And sometimes, lasting just a little longer made all the difference. The world of Australopithecus was also one of connections. Europe and Asia weren't cut off from Africa the way they seem now. Land bridges and shifting climates allowed animals to move between continents. That means apes in Europe could have influenced apes in Africa, or shared traits, or even crossed paths in ways we can only imagine. Australopithecus might have been part of this bigger web, not isolated but connected to a larger story of migration and change. When I think about that, it feels like watching a river with many branches. Some flow into lakes, some dry out, and some join together into a bigger stream. Australopithecus was one of those branches. We don't know if his line joined the bigger stream that led to humans or if it dried out. But either way, he was part of the river of life flowing forward. One detail that always catches my attention is his face. Fossils show that Australopithecus had a flat, broad face with big jaws. Some scientists even say it looked a little more human-like than some other apes of the time. Not fully human, of course, but hints of a direction that would later matter. Imagine looking at his face, you'd see something both familiar and strange. Not a chimp, not a gorilla, not a person, but something in between. That mixture makes me feel like we're staring at a mirror from far away, blurry but recognizable. But no matter how much he looked like us, he was still very different. He didn't make tools, didn't control fire, didn't speak in languages. His intelligence was the intelligence of survival, finding food, avoiding danger, living in groups. And yet, inside those small daily struggles, the seeds of something bigger were hidden. Because that's where it all begins, with survival. Without those simple victories, nothing else could ever come later. The more I learn about his world, the more I realize how fragile life is. Forests grow, then shrink. Animals rise, then fall. Whole species appear, then vanish. And yet, through all those changes, some line of apes kept going, kept adapting, until one day they became us. Australopithecus might not have known it, but he was standing at the edge of something huge. He was part of the testing ground that would eventually give birth to humanity. I like to think of it this way: if you were alive 9 million years ago and walked through the hills of Greece, you might see Australopithecus in the trees. You wouldn't think, "That's my ancestor." You'd just see another ape. But hidden in that ape was the possibility of us, the possibility of hands that would one day build cities, of minds that would one day ask questions about the universe. That's what makes his world so important. Because the story of evolution isn't just about the strongest or the smartest. It's about change. The earth changed, the climate changed, The animals changed. And Auranopithecus was right in the middle of that swirl. His world was shifting under his feet, and whether he knew it or not, those shifts would shape the path to humanity. Whenever I think about apes, one thing always comes to mind: families. Not families like ours with houses, schools, and dinners around a table, but families that live together in groups, looking out for one another. And when I try to imagine Auranopithecus, I picture him not alone, but surrounded by others, because apes are social creatures. Survival isn't just about teeth or muscles. It's also about each other. 9 million years ago, in the hills and forests of ancient Greece, a group of Auranopithecus might have woken with the sunrise. The air was still cool, filled with the buzz of insects. Leaves rustled as young apes clung to their mothers. Older males stretched their strong arms, ready for another long day of searching for food. It wasn't a family the way we know it, but it was still a group bound together by instincts, needs, and maybe even bonds of affection. Scientists can't be sure exactly how Auranopithecus lived, because fossils don't show behavior. Bones don't tell us about hugs, or calls, or grooming. But by looking at modern apes, we can make guesses. Today, gorillas live in groups led by a silverback male. Chimpanzees live in larger communities, full of friendships and rivalries. Orangutans spend more time alone. Auranopithecus could have been like any of these or something in between. Still, I like to imagine their lives. A mother grooming her child, picking insects out of its fur. Two young apes wrestling in play, learning the skills they'd need to climb and survive. An older male keeping watch, his eyes scanning the forest edge for danger. These moments are small, but they're what survival was made of. Because in a world of predators and hunger, having a group could mean the difference between life and death. Food was the heart of their day. Every sunrise meant another search. With forests thinning, the group might have walked farther and farther to find enough fruit or plants to eat. Maybe they cracked hard seeds, chewed fibrous stems, or dug for roots. Their powerful jaws and teeth weren't just for show, they were tools, as important as our forks and spoons are today. I think about how meals brought them together, just like families now gather at a table. Only theirs was a patch of forest floor, with everyone chewing slowly while staying alert. But life in a group wasn't always peaceful. Just like modern apes, there might have been fights. Two males competing over who got the best food, or who had the right to stay close to females. Dominance mattered in the animal world, and Auranopithecus probably had his share of quarrels. But even in those struggles, there was a kind of balance. Because too much fighting could weaken the group, and survival meant finding ways to live together. I imagine that communication was a big part of it. They didn't talk like us, but they had other ways. Maybe loud calls that echoed through the trees, warning of danger. Maybe softer grunts or coos that comforted a baby. Maybe even facial expressions, teeth bared in anger, or gentle eyes showing calm. It's strange to think about, but those small sounds and gestures might have been the seeds of human communication. Every look and call carried meaning, building a language of survival long before words were invented. And what about play? It's easy to forget, but play is important. Young apes wrestle, chase, and climb not just for fun, but to practice skills. A young Auranopithecus clinging to branches, testing his balance, was also preparing for the day he'd need to escape a predator or reach for food high above. In those playful moments, the future was being trained. Then there were the mothers. I always think about them. Carrying infants, protecting them, teaching them how to move, what to eat, when to be careful. Without mothers, no species survives. Auranopithecus mothers must have been just as dedicated as mothers today, holding their babies close even while climbing or traveling. That bond, the touch of warmth, the safety of arms, is probably one of the oldest feelings in history. It connects us all the way back to creatures like them. But families aren't only about mothers and children. They're also about trust. Maybe some apes groomed each other, picking dirt and bugs from fur, building bonds through touch. That act wasn't just about cleanliness, it was about saying, I trust you. I care about you. It was about peace in a group that needed to stick together. I like to think that even then, millions of years ago, friendship existed in some form. Life wasn't easy, though. Every day carried risks. Predators were out there: ancient cats, hyenas, and other hunters. A group of apes might have been safer together, but danger was never far away. I can almost hear the sudden alarm call, the scramble into trees, the pounding of hearts. Survival wasn't guaranteed. It depended on alertness, speed, and yes, the strength of the group. When I think about those families of Auranopithecus, I see the roots of something bigger. Because what makes humans human isn't just our brains or tools, it's our connections. We live in families, we form groups, we rely on each other. And maybe, just maybe, that didn't start with us. Maybe it began in the distant forests, in the bonds between apes who discovered that together was better than alone. It's almost like they were practicing for what would come later. Not on purpose, of course. They weren't planning the future. They were just living, day by day. But hidden in their daily struggles were the lessons of humanity, cooperation, care, communication. Those simple things became the foundation of cities, communities, and civilizations millions of years later. So when I imagine Auranopithecus, I don't see a lonely figure. I see a family. A group moving together through ancient landscapes, sharing food, warning of danger, raising young. They didn't know it, but they were writing the first lines of the story of us, not with words, but with actions. That's why I think of them not only as apes, but as families in the forest. And in their bonds, I see the very first glimmers of what would one day become human society. Whenever I look at my own hands, I sometimes wonder, how many millions of years did it take for them to become this way? 5 fingers, strong thumbs, skin that wrinkles, nails instead of claws. They look so normal to me, but if you think about it, they're like history books written in flesh. Every curve, every bone, every joint carries a story. And part of that story stretches all the way back to creatures like Auranopithecus. Fossils can only tell us so much. Teeth, jaws, fragments of bone, that's what we have of Auranopithecus. But those tiny details give scientists huge clues. For example, the size and shape of his teeth. Big molars, thick enamel, strong jaw muscles. That tells us what kind of food he ate, and in turn, what kind of world he lived in. Hard foods, dry plants, nuts, things you can't chew easily unless your teeth are built for it. So even without seeing his full body, we know his life was shaped by what he had to eat. But it's not just about diet. Auranopithecus' face was wide, his jaw heavy, and his brow strong. Some scientists noticed those traits looked a little closer to humans than to some other apes. Not human, of course, but hints of a direction that would matter later. It's like looking at an old photograph where you catch a glimpse of someone's eyes and think, that looks familiar. What's amazing is how much of our human body today still whispers about our ape past. Take our teeth, for example. We don't need giant jaws anymore because we cook our food, we cut it, we soften it. But the fact that we still have molars at the back of our mouths reminds us of a time when chewing tough plants was daily survival. Every time I bite into something crunchy, I think of apes like Auranopithecus grinding their meals in the ancient forests. Then there are our hands. We humans have opposable thumbs, which means we can touch our thumb to our other fingers. That seems normal, but it's actually special. It's what lets us grip tools, write, build, and even play games. Did Auranopithecus have thumbs like us? Most likely, yes, because apes do. He used them to climb trees, grasp branches, and grab food. But here's the interesting part, while he used his thumbs for climbing and feeding, we took that same ability and turned it into something far bigger. We built tools. We shaped the world. That's how evolution works. It doesn't start fresh every time, it reuses old designs and pushes them in new directions. Our bones also tell stories. Humans walk upright, on two legs. That's one of our biggest differences from apes. Australopithecus didn't walk like us. He was probably still moving on all fours, climbing trees, and using his arms for strength. But the stage for walking upright was slowly being set. Climate changes were opening more grasslands, and apes that could spend more time on the ground had advantages. Even if Australopithecus wasn't fully upright, he lived in the kind of environment where that shift might have started to matter. When I think about it, it feels like our bodies are layered with memories. Look at our spine, it still has the curve of creatures that once moved on all fours. Look at our hair, we don't need it for warmth like they did, but it's still there, a leftover of older times. Look at our feet, arches for walking upright, but toes that still hint at gripping branches. We are walking fossils ourselves, carrying the past in our very bones. And it's not only bones. Even the way we live echoes the past. Apes, including Australopithecus, survived in groups. We humans still live in groups. We build families, towns, nations. Apes communicated with calls and gestures, we communicate with language. Apes cared for their young, we care for ours. It's not that we copied them, it's that those behaviors were already useful, already working, so evolution kept them and built on them. Sometimes I wonder what it felt like to be Australopithecus. Not just to look like him, but to feel like him. His muscles pulling as he climbed, his jaws aching after chewing tough food, his heart racing when danger was near. Those sensations must have been real and sharp. And even though we live in houses now, drive cars, and eat cooked meals, our bodies still respond in similar ways. Our hearts still race when we're scared. Our muscles still ache after hard work. Our stomachs still remind us when we're hungry. We're not so different, really, we just live in a different world. Scientists sometimes call humans the storytelling ape. I like that, because it shows how far we've come. Australopithecus never told stories. He never wondered about fossils or the future. But the very body he carried, the very traits he passed down through generations, made it possible for us to one day sit here and ask these questions. Our stories begin with bodies like his. One of the coolest things I learned is that our DNA, our genetic code, still carries the record of this long journey. When scientists study chimpanzee DNA and human DNA, they find we're about 98 to 99% the same. That tiny difference is what separates us. But what about apes like Australopithecus, who lived before chimps and humans split apart? If we could read his DNA, we'd see the earlier version of that code, before the branches divided. Sadly, DNA doesn't last millions of years in fossils, so we may never know for sure. But even imagining it gives me chills. Somewhere inside us are the echoes of that ancient code. That's what makes me see our bodies differently. They're not just shells we live in, they're living history books. Our hands, teeth, bones, even our habits are pages in a story that stretches back millions of years. Australopithecus was one of the early chapters, one that helped set the stage for everything that came later. I think about it this way: when I look in the mirror, I see myself. But behind my reflection are layers: parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, stretching back generation after generation. If I kept pulling that thread back far enough, one day it would lead not to a person, but to an ape like Australopithecus. And beyond him, to even older ancestors. My body carries their story whether I think about it or not. That's why I think of Australopithecus as more than just a fossil in a museum. He's part of us. Not directly, maybe we don't know if he's our exact ancestor, but he's close enough to remind us where we came from. He shows us that our bodies weren't designed in an instant. They were shaped slowly, patiently, by the world itself. Every bite he chewed, every branch he climbed, every challenge he faced was part of the experiment of life that eventually created us. So the next time I wiggle my fingers or stretch my back, I think about him. About an ape in ancient Greece, 9 million years ago, carrying a body that wasn't human but wasn't so far away either. A body that whispered the first clues of what we would one day become. Whenever people talk about evolution, they often imagine it like a ladder. You start with an ape at the bottom and climb step by step until you get to a human at the top. But the truth is, it's nothing like a ladder. It's more like a tree full of twisting branches, some reaching far, some breaking off, some growing close together before splitting apart. And somewhere in that tree, our Australopithecus had his branch. I used to think our family tree was simple, first apes, then humans. But once you learn about all the other species that came and went, it feels like a giant puzzle. Apes in Europe, apes in Africa, apes in Asia, all living at different times, all trying to survive in their own way. Most of them left no direct descendants. Their branches ended. But without them, the tree wouldn't have grown the way it did. Our Australopithecus lived in Europe, in Greece. That already makes him special, because most of the story of human evolution is centered in Africa. Some scientists think his presence in Europe shows that the ancestors of humans might have once spread wider than we thought. Others think he was part of a side branch, related but not directly leading to us. It's like looking at an old family photo and trying to figure out if the person in the corner is a direct great-grandparent or just a distant cousin. What's tricky is that we don't have many fossils. Only fragments. Skulls, teeth, parts of jaws. It's like having a handful of puzzle pieces from a 1,000-piece set. We can tell they're important, but we don't know exactly where they fit. Some scientists argue that our Australopithecus was close to the last common ancestor of humans and African apes. Others say he was more like a European offshoot that eventually went extinct. The debates go on, and each new fossil discovery can change the picture. That's what makes the family tree so fascinating. It's not finished. Every new discovery redraws the branches. Imagine drawing a giant tree in pencil, then constantly erasing and sketching new branches as you learn more. That's what paleoanthropologists do. They're not just studying bones, they're redrawing the story of life. What's clear, though, is that our Australopithecus was part of a very busy time in evolution. Between 7 and 10 million years ago, many different apes lived across Africa and Eurasia. They weren't all the same. Some were smaller, some bigger, some adapted for dense forests, some for open woodlands. Each was like a different experiment in survival. Some experiments failed, but others led to us. I like to think of it as nature testing ideas. What if an ape had bigger jaws? What if it lived in open grasslands? What if it climbed less and walked more? Some of those ideas worked, some didn't. Our Australopithecus was one of those ideas. Whether his branch connected to us or not, he was part of the grand testing ground that eventually produced humans. What's interesting is how close in time this all was. Our Australopithecus lived around 9 million years ago. The split between humans and chimpanzees probably happened around 6 to 7 million years ago. That means he lived not long before the line that led to us branched off. In evolutionary time, that's like being just a few chapters before the main twist in the story. Imagine the family tree again. At the base are the earliest primates, tiny creatures scurrying in ancient forests. Higher up, branches spread into monkeys and apes. Then, one branch splits into orangutans, another into gorillas, another into chimps, and finally humans. Our Australopithecus sits close to the point where some of those splits happened. He might not be on the exact branch that led to us, but he was nearby, watching the tree grow in ways he couldn't imagine. Sometimes, I think about how connected we all are. Humans, chimps, gorillas, we're all cousins on this tree. Our Australopithecus is like an older cousin who lived long ago, whose branch ended, but who still shaped the tree's growth. Without him and others like him, maybe the tree would have grown differently, or not at all. It makes me see humans in a different light. We're not separate from nature, standing above it. We're part of it, growing out of the same roots as every other living thing. Our family tree doesn't stop at humans, it stretches down to apes, monkeys, mammals, reptiles, fish, and all the way to the first single-celled life. Auranopithecus is just one of the many figures in that enormous, tangled story. What's also fascinating is how fragile those branches are. Think about it, most species that ever lived are now extinct. They were once alive, breathing, struggling to survive just like us. Now they're gone, leaving only fossils and shadows in our DNA. Auranopithecus was one of those. He lived, he thrived for a time, and then his kind disappeared. But that doesn't make him less important. In fact, it makes him even more meaningful. Because his story shows how survival is never guaranteed, how evolution is full of risks. Sometimes I imagine if his branch hadn't ended. What if Auranopithecus descendants had survived alongside humans? Would there be another intelligent species walking the earth today, related to us but different? Would they build their own tools, their own homes, their own stories? We'll never know, because his branch was cut off. But thinking about it makes me realize how special our survival really is. And yet, in a way, he does live on in us. Not directly, maybe, but through the traits and lessons passed down by all apes of his time. The way he chewed food, the way he moved in groups, the way his body adapted to a changing world, all of that shaped the environment that shaped us. His branch may have ended, but its roots fed the rest of the tree. When I look at my family tree at home, with photos of grandparents and great-grandparents, I feel connected. But when I think about the bigger family tree, the tree of life, I feel something even deeper. Auranopithecus is part of that family. He's not just a fossil. He's a reminder that our story isn't straight and simple. It's twisted, messy, and full of branches that ended too soon. And maybe that's the most important lesson. We humans didn't appear out of nowhere. We're not the top of evolution. We're just one branch that happened to grow far. And before us were countless other branches like Auranopithecus that made our branch possible. So when I think about him, I don't just see an ape in Greece 9 million years ago. I see a cousin on the family tree. A cousin whose life, even though it ended long ago, still matters. Because without all those cousins, without all those branches, the tree of humanity would never have grown. When I think about the moment humans first started to stand tall, it feels almost magical. Imagine all those millions of years when apes moved mostly on four limbs, climbing, swinging, crouching, and then something began to change. Slowly, step by step, some of them started walking upright. It wasn't sudden, like flipping a switch. It was a slow, careful shift, shaped by time, environment, and need. Auranopithecus himself probably wasn't fully upright like us. Most scientists think he still spent a lot of time in the trees, climbing and gripping with strong arms. But his world was changing. The forests he lived in were thinning, giving way to patches of grassland. That kind of environment favors creatures that can move across open ground, not just climb branches. Some apes, maybe close cousins of Auranopithecus, began to experiment with standing more often, with balancing on 2 feet. At first, it might have just been for short moments, standing to grab fruit, to carry food, or to look over tall grass for danger. But over generations, those small advantages became bigger. Walking upright freed the hands. Suddenly, an ape could carry food back to share with others, or hold a stick, or later, shape a stone. Standing tall also gave a better view of the world, which could mean spotting predators earlier or finding food more easily. I try to imagine what it felt like the first time one of our ancestors walked a distance fully upright. Did it feel awkward? Did others in the group watch curiously? Did they laugh, or copy? Or was it so gradual that no one even noticed, each generation just walking a little more until it became normal? That's the thing about evolution, it's not about single moments. It's about tiny changes that, over a long time, make a huge difference. The evidence we have for those first walkers comes from fossils like Sahelanthropus chodensis, around 7 million years old, and Ororhyntogenensis, around 6 million years old. Both lived not long after Auranopithecus, and both show hints of bipedalism, walking on 2 feet. Their bones suggest they still climbed trees but also had adaptations for walking. It's like catching evolution in the middle of its experiment. That's what makes Auranopithecus so important to the story. He lived just before that shift. He belonged to the time when the stage was being set, when the environment was pushing apes toward new solutions. He may not have walked far on 2 feet, but he represents the world that made walking necessary. Without his time, maybe that experiment never would have taken root. Walking upright wasn't just a physical change. It shaped everything else. With free hands, our ancestors could interact with the world in new ways. They could gather more food, carry babies longer distances, even defend themselves more effectively. Over time, those free hands became tool-making hands. And tool-making hands led to bigger brains, because problem-solving became a matter of survival. It's like one change opened the door to all the others. But walking had its costs too. It put more strain on the spine, hips, and knees. Injuries that didn't matter when moving on 4 limbs suddenly became serious. Giving birth also became more complicated, because upright walking narrowed the pelvis while babies' brains were growing larger. Evolution always involves trade-offs. But somehow, the benefits outweighed the costs, and the upright walkers thrived. Sometimes I wonder what Auranopithecus would think if he could see his distant relatives walking tall. Would he recognize us as kin? Would he be amazed at the way we balance so easily on 2 legs? Or would he see us as strange, almost unnatural, compared to the way his own body moved? It's strange to think that such small steps literally were the beginning of everything we know as human. The world of those early walkers must have been both exciting and dangerous. Imagine the African landscape 6 or 7 million years ago, grasslands stretching far, scattered trees, rivers and lakes drawing herds of animals. There were predators everywhere, big cats, hyenas, crocodiles. To survive in that world, our ancestors had to be alert, clever, and cooperative. Standing upright gave them a fighting chance. And with cooperation came something else, stronger social bonds. Sharing food, protecting each other, raising young together, these behaviors became more important as survival grew harder. Auranopithecus probably already lived in groups, like modern apes do. But as walking ancestors faced open landscapes, group life became even more vital. Evolution wasn't just about stronger bodies, it was about closer relationships. That's what I like most about this part of the story. Evolution isn't only about bones and muscles, it's about connection. The moment we began walking, we also began depending on each other more. Upright walking freed our hands, and those hands reached out not just for tools, but for one another. They carried, shared, and comforted. That's the real start of humanity, not just standing tall, but standing together. Looking back, it's almost funny how small the differences are between Auranopithecus and those first walkers. A few bone shapes, a little more time on 2 feet, a slightly different environment. But those small differences were the seeds of the future. Without them, there would be no us. It makes me think about how fragile the whole story is. If forests hadn't thinned, if climates hadn't shifted, maybe walking upright never would have been useful. Maybe we'd still be in the trees, swinging and climbing, never shaping stones or writing stories. Evolution isn't a plan, it's a series of chances, shaped by environment and survival. We're lucky those chances lined up the way they did. Sometimes when I walk outside, I try to imagine every step as part of that history. Each step I take is connected to those first, awkward steps millions of years ago. My legs, my balance, even the way my foot touches the ground, all of it carries the memory of that shift. I don't notice it most of the time, but when I do, it feels like walking with ghosts. Not scary ghosts, friendly ones, reminding me where I come from. And then I think about Auranopithecus again. Maybe his branch ended, but without him and others like him, the stage for walking might never have been set. He represents a time when nature was still experimenting, still shaping the path that led to us. In a way, every step we take today is also his step, echoing across 9 million years. We often think of the future as something new and separate. But really, the future grows out of the past. Walking into the future was only possible because of all the creatures who came before, who adapted, who changed, who tried. Auranopithecus was one of them. He didn't know it, of course. He was just living his life, climbing, eating, surviving. But in doing so, he became part of something bigger than himself. And maybe that's the real magic of evolution. It doesn't need anyone to plan it. It doesn't need anyone to notice it happening. It just works, slowly, silently, across countless generations. From climbing to walking. From carrying sticks to shaping tools. From small groups of apes to billions of humans today. All because, long ago, an ape like Auranopithecus lived in a changing world and adapted as best he could. When I walk now, I think about him. I think about how each step is more than just movement. It's history. It's survival. It's connection. It's the story of life, still unfolding with every footprint we leave behind.